The news that a lot of, in fact maybe most Spurs fans have been waiting for has broken. A Chris Waddle and Paul Gascoigne-esque ball carrier, an England playmaker no less, is topping Tottenham's list of the players they want to get in this summer. And I think, and you can call me on this if I'm incorrect, but I think that by the end of this summer, the player that we most need to push on Ange's system and philosophy and get us up towards the top of the table will be wearing a Tottenham Hotspur shirt. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in once again. Please do give the video a like. Press subscribe if you haven't already for daily Premier League transfer news content. And also, if you want to become a member, it's only £1 a month to help me make this daily content. All the information in the description box below. But guys, let's get started, of course, with my beloved Tottenham Hotspur. And that's right, I'm talking about Eberechi Eze, the Crystal Palace playmaker. What an absolute... I don't know. I just think this boy has so much talent. He's such a genius on the ball. He is so graceful, carries it at such pace, and can beat a man, drop a shoulder either way, and an expert finisher too. And all the news coming out this weekend is that he has jumped to the very top of Johan Lang and Ange Postecoglou's list of targets, and I completely agree with it. He is the kind of player we need to keep the pressure on in that final third, to keep the ball more and stop those transitions from hitting us the other way, and of course to help us create, help James Maddison with creativity, let James Maddison have a rest if needed, but he can also play from the left or as an 8, and I just think what a player Eze is. And like I said in the intro, I just have a feeling that this is going to be this summer's James Maddison transfer. If you remember last summer, all the stories in the run-up to the transfer window was that Spurs were favourites for Maddison's signature. Newcastle were interested. They were sniffing about. They wanted to give him more money. But Maddison liked the sound of Spurs, and once he spoke to Ange Postecoglou, there was only one place he wanted to go. And I just have a feeling, with all of the stuff that's come out in the last few weeks and months, Eze being pictured with Sonny at a fashion show, James Maddison working hard on England duty, lots of social media pictures of them together there, and I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong here in the comments, but I believe that Eze shares the CAA base agency with a lot of those top players who have come to Spurs over the last few years. So all the signs, I think, are pointing in the correct direction, and I think he's exactly the player that Tottenham need to sign. Should say, also talk coming out this weekend that Chelsea are interested in Eze as well, but who aren't they interested in? They're such a basket case of a club. They're just sprouting out interest everywhere, trying to throw money around. And if I was Eze, and especially if I got to have that conversation with Ange Postecoglou, and having watched the kind of football that Spurs have played over the last year, I think it's a no-brainer. Come and join Maddison in the creative hub. Come and join Spurs and push us up to challenge for trophies. Other Tottenham Hotspur transfer news coming out over the last couple of years. We're keeping tabs on 18-year-old Celtic midfielder Daniel Kelly, but he is also attracting interest from a number of clubs, both in Britain and abroad. Leverkusen and Manchester United also interested in him. But I think, as I've said a few times, this is absolutely in keeping with Tottenham's transfer policy now. You're looking at players we can get for between 40 and 60 million pounds at the top end who can come straight into the first team and really affect things immediately. And then we're looking at the next generation, the biggest talents around, those that we can get and grow with the club, and they'll be hungry. So we're talking about your Lucas Bergvalls and in this case, your Daniel Kelly. So it'll be interesting to see what happens from that. That is from the Daily Record in Scotland, who say that Tottenham are very interested in the player. This isn't a direct transfer rumour, but it's incredibly relevant to it. I'm sure you'll have seen that this weekend a lot of talk has come out about Tottenham in talks with investors, potential investors for the club, to take a percentage stake into Tottenham Hotspur. ENIC to sell some of that stake. Some stories saying that Joe Lewis is looking to sell his stake. He's obviously kind of in his 90s now. He's just been charged and found guilty in an American court. I know that his, certainly officially, legally, his stake in the club is run by a trust. But the talks that were first came out, I think this was around Friday, that we're the investment company MSP Sports Capital are looking and are in talks with Daniel Levy about perhaps investing or having a 40% stake in Tottenham Hotspur. Then Paul O'Keefe said on Twitter that it's not just the MSP Sports Capital group. They are in talks with around 5 or 6 different possible groups. Now, This is obviously interesting, and for those of you who are anti-ENIC and anti-Daniel Levy, maybe this will excite you, but I would say what Paul O'Keefe has come out with means that maybe it's not quite as imminent as the initial report first suggested. Tottenham have been in talks with potential investors for 18 months, 2 years now, and have certainly been looking to increase their kind of cash flow. Because as we all know, the stadium allows us to spend a lot of money, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of money there due to all of the loans we have to pay off, etc., etc. So until there's like a concrete one, the MSP one is interesting because obviously they've invested in a lot of different sports clubs and companies and teams. But until there's something more concrete, I'm going to take that one with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Next bit of news, Oliver Skipp is keen apparently to head out of Tottenham this summer to get regular game time. But in order for Spurs and Big Ange to sanction a move, they're going to have to find a way to absorb his loss as a club-trained homegrown player. Now, I spoke about this late last week in terms of that interest we have in Marcus Edwards and also interest we've shown in Kyle Walker-Peters. That is no coincidence. It's because they are, in terms of UEFA and what you need in the Europa League or the Champions League, but this season for us, obviously the Europa League, you need to have a certain number of club-trained homegrown players in your squad. And that's why we're sniffing around those players who we let go previously and have now done well at the clubs they went to, and maybe we'd be looking to bring back. So Oliver Skipp seems like he's in a bit of a difficult position, maybe a bit of a pawn, to be honest, because he's not getting regular game time under Big Ange. He did obviously get a few games at the back end of the season playing at left back, but I don't think realistically that is going to be something he's going to do much going forward. And he needs game time. I've said this all along. I think he's a rhythm player. You speak to any Norwich fan, when he went on loan to Norwich, they said he was the best player they had there for years. And when he plays every game, when he gets into the rhythm, when he gets into the pace of what's happening, he is an incredibly talented player. Do not forget what the Dutch under-21 national team said in their changing room when they played the England under-21s a few years ago. They were caught on camera saying that Oliver Skipp plays like a Dutch footballer, by which they mean technically incredibly proficient, willing to take the ball on the half turn, brave on the ball as well. So I feel sad for Oliver Skipp. I think he needs a loan to a kind of lower mid-table to lower Premier League club. And if he got that loan, I think he would be indispensable to whichever team he went for. And maybe that would raise his value and give him more of a chance to either come back at Spurs and get a chance in the first team as a potential 6 replacement for Yves Bissouma, or to get a move permanently away from Spurs. So keep your eyes peeled on what happens to Oliver Skipp. Obviously, we talked a lot about the June the 30th deadline for when clubs need to have made money. Any clubs who are in financial kind of disarray, they will need to have made their money to get it on the next profit and sustainability rules balance sheet. Well, Nottingham Forest, certainly, according to all the reports coming out over the weekend, they certainly need to balance some books. And therefore, they are seeing Morgan Gibbs-White, who has been interesting Spurs for a number of months, as potentially available for as little as £40 million. I've also heard stories coming out from people in the know, journalists who know what's going on at Everton, that the realities of how much money they need to make before June the 30th is that they may really sell some of their key players for cut down prices. We're talking about players like Calvert-Lewin, like Branthwaite, maybe even Jordan Pickford, and that they would look to sell them before June the 30th, and that clubs know that they need money, so they will just wait till the very end of June and then cherry pick those players for as cheap as possible. And you can guarantee that Daniel Levy will be involved in that bun fight if it comes to it. Out of those players I mentioned, if you're a Spurs fan, would you take any of Branthwaite, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, or Jordan Pickford? I think Pickford is the least likely, of course, because we've got Vicario and he's done really well. But the other two, Spurs have been sniffing around Branthwaite for the season, basically. And then Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I know it's an interesting one. I've said it a little bit before. I do think he's got all the attributes to be an incredible number 9. I really do. I know he had a bit of a bad spell last season, and his big issue, more than anything else, is his ability to get on the pitch. He gets injured so much. But if we were looking for a potential number 9 to, squad depth around Richarlison and around Sonny, and you could get Calvert-Lewin for, 30, 35 million, homegrown player as well, it might be one I'd be willing to take a risk on. More Spurs news. Troy Parrott was in the second leg of his final playoff game in the Dutch Eredivisie this weekend. He scored his second hat-trick in just 3 games, and he's actually ended the season with 17 goals and 5 assists for Excelsior in the Dutch First Division, who got relegated in the end. But what an effort that is to score 17 goals for a team who were poor all season. Really impressive loan spell for Troy Parrott. Let's not forget, a few years ago when Mourinho was in charge, a lot of fans were talking about Troy Parrott as the next Harry Kane. All the talent and all the ability. And then there was some talk, perhaps, that maybe he had some, personality and behavioural things that were stopping him from reaching the developmental peak that he needed to. So he's gone off on a couple of loans, none of which before this loan at Excelsior have really succeeded. But he's gone away, he scored 17 goals, and it would not surprise me at all if some Bundesliga clubs or other Dutch clubs were sniffing around him, and it would be interesting to see if Big Ange gives him a chance in pre-season. I'd really like him to. He's a big guy, he's strong on the ball, and I just want to see, has he got it? I think if Ange thinks that he's got it and he can come in and be a potential number 9 squad player, then let's give him that chance. But if Ange has seen enough already or gives him a few games in pre-season and seen enough, then it might be the right time to sell him because he scored a lot of goals in a top league in Europe and there will be clubs sniffing around. Lucas Bergvall, as I mentioned earlier, he is coming to Spurs on July the 1st and he's just played his final game for Djurgården in Sweden. 1st of July, he'll be ready for a full pre-season. What an exciting player. If you haven't checked any clips out of Lucas Bergvall, make sure you do. Incredibly exciting that he is going to be coming into Spurs. Club have also confirmed this weekend that our new home kit will be released tomorrow, Tuesday the 4th of June. If you haven't seen this kit so far, give it a little Google. It's my favourite kit that Spurs have released in a number of years. It's a bit of a throwback to the kind of noughties Kappa, blue sleeves, white tight shirt. It's not as tight because it's Nike, it's not Kappa, but it has got the blue sleeves and there's this lovely kind of stripy trim on both the short sleeve and the end of the shorts that I'm a really big fan of. I'm not usually that big into kits because I do think that although for many, many years I wanted Spurs to get Nike, since we've had Nike, I think Spurs have kind of been treated like a little bit of a lower, like a club that they're least interested in, and that's relevant to the amount of money that we've paid for our deal, but I feel like they make more effort with Chelsea kits or some of their other Nike branded clubs. But this one actually is a really, really good kit. I'm very excited about it. So give it a check it out and get down to the club shop or get it from the club website tomorrow. That's when it is released. There have been some records released by the Premier League this season, and one that I wanted to point you out to in case you hadn't seen it is that Ange Postecoglou, having won 26 points from his first 30 available with those 8 wins and 2 draws, that is the most Premier League points secured by a manager in their first 10 matches in the competition ever. Those first 10 games, they really showed us what Tottenham can be capable of. What if we get the right squad depth and if we manage to kind of hold our, I don't know, what's the right word? I'm talking about that Chelsea game, of course, where we were kind of almost too pumped for it. We were too motivated for it. We went in too hard. We wanted it too badly. And even despite all that, we nearly went 2-0 up, the goal that was disallowed for Sonny. If we'd gone 2-0 up there, we would have won that game. And I do not know how long that momentum would have lasted for. But for me, going back to those first 10 games, and especially with the kind of skeleton squad that Ange had in terms of the players that he wanted and that were his style of player, very exciting times for Spurs if we can get another great pre-season in, add to the squad how Ange wants to, and then I think we could go on a similar but longer series of unbeaten games with a great momentum next season. Big Sam Allardyce, ex-England manager, piped up about whether he thinks James Maddison should go to the Euros this summer. I've been quite honest about it with Madders. I love him and I'm sure he really wants to go to the Euros, but I personally think he could do with a break. He gets too many injuries. I'm not sure he ever fully recovered from the injury that kept him out for 3 months this season. But anyway, Big Sam Allardyce. Who's bigger, Big Ange or Big Sam Allardyce? Let me know in the comments. I'll go Big Ange. I trust Big Ange in a fight against Sam. But Allardyce says, no, for me, Maddison shouldn't go. Much better players are already in the squad, and there's a fitness problem with him. Well, I agree on the fitness side. I'm not sure if I agree on that being much better players. I think Maddison at his best is a top Premier League player. I really do. But anyway, Allardyce goes on. He gets injured far too much last season, this season. You want players who are going to stay fit. I think that's one of the reasons you look at. I've got to say, no shade on Maddison, but I agree with Allardyce on the fitness thing. Southgate is going to want players who can come in at all times and not going to pick up injuries and who have been in the best form. And if you're looking at other players available to him for this summer, for this summer's tournament, you're looking at Eze, you're looking at Cole Palmer, you're looking at Jude Bellingham, you're looking at Saka. You know, just so much talent in that front third. And I think if he's going to have to trim down, I think, like a 32, 33-man preliminary squad into a 26-man final squad, and with Maddison not really having shown his best form, it wouldn't surprise me if maybe he was one of the players who missed out. Club legend Jurgen Klinsmann, one of the great strikers of my lifetime at Tottenham Hotspur, and one half of, perhaps, alongside Berbatov and Keane, and obviously Sonny and Kane, the greatest partnership I've seen in my lifetime. Jurgen Klinsmann and Teddy Sheringham were unbelievable together. They only had one proper season together, but it was unbelievable. If you haven't seen it, YouTube it. Really incredible. But he has talked about what he thought of Spurs this season. He said it started very, very well in the Premier League, being first and giving hope to all Spurs fans. Maybe this is it. This is the season that we create the big, big surprise by winning the Premier League, he wondered. But then, during the second half of the season, it went more downhill, and you end up in a very respectable 5th spot. I think it's acceptable, but obviously the expectations at Spurs over the last 10 years are higher and higher. They want to see trophies, they want to see some silverware. Obviously, it was the year after Harry Kane. Absolutely, it's very difficult. He has been so exceptional for the club, for all the goals that he scored. It was a tough one for Ange Postecoglou to swallow that he didn't have Harry Kane available to get him all the goals. So look, I'm not disagreeing with Jurgen Klinsmann. Of course, Ange Postecoglou would have preferred Harry Kane to be there. Absolutely no doubt about that. However, what I will say is that I think Ange Postecoglou knew that Harry Kane wasn't going to be playing for him. I think he knew that when he accepted the job, and I think he liked the idea of the challenge that was possible to kind of bring Spurs and get them doing better without Harry Kane than they did with. And in terms of last season to this season, he did that. 6 points better off, 5th place instead of 8th place. And I think times are exciting for Spurs. Good to hear what Jurgen Klinsmann had to say. I love it when I hear kind of old club legends still keeping an eye on Tottenham, And Jurgen Klinsmann, he's been kind of linked with the Spurs job numerous times down the years, but I'm not sure that his managerial credentials are really that good. But an unbelievable footballer. What a player Jurgen Klinsmann was. Hugo Lloris has also done an interview. He's obviously out in LA now playing in the MLS, and he's talked some more about his last season at Spurs. He says, Tottenham were coming to the end of a cycle, and so was I. I knew that Tottenham wanted to recruit younger players, especially in my position. Summer was approaching, and I was no longer part of the plans. When the championship resumed in August 2023, the coach informed me that I would no longer be on the field, that I would only be a training player. I was pushed aside. I had become transparent. Now that's interesting because he's done some interviews before Hugo since he's left Spurs, and they seemed a lot more kind of supportive of Ange than that. That seems like there's a little bit of resentment. But look, Hugo Lloris, club legend, but was his form dropping off towards the end? Absolutely. And I cannot forget that Newcastle game where he conceded 5 in the first 20 minutes and then never came out for the second half. They said he was injured. He never played again for Spurs. And look, I don't have any direct evidence to back this up, but I just think something happened in that changing room that meant he couldn't play for Spurs again, and it was definitely his time to go. But like I said, club legend. We were lucky to get him when we got him. He was a very modern keeper for where we were at the time. And actually, in the kind of over 10 years at the club, he went from being a very modern sweeper keeper, coming out off his line, to really becoming a little bit surpassed by the modern day keeper, because he was then so bad at distribution by the end of his career at Spurs that I think we mainly needed to replace him on that basis alone. His shot-stopping ability was second to none, but he had, in the last year or so, started throwing a few more in, especially in big games, and his distribution, like I said, wasn't quite good enough. But Hugo Lloris, he doesn't go down in my estimation at all. Kyle Walker has also been talking, presumably on his new podcast, which I talked a little bit about last week, called You Never Beat Kyle Walker. He has talked a little bit about what he's seen firsthand of Heung-min Son's fame in South Korea. He said this: I went to South Korea with Sonny. I'd never seen anything like it. We'd do an appearance. There was me, Kevin Wimmer, Ben Davis, and Sonny. But we were all like jokers for him. We'd had to send a dummy vehicle pretending that Sonny's gone. They'd corner the vehicle, stop it, see Sonny's not in the car, and then we'd be away. But then they, presumably meaning the fans, would come back to the hotel. I've never seen anything like it. I've seen Rooney, Lampard, Beckham, to a certain degree, a bit like that. But he was beyond them. So really just giving us an insight into Sonny's absolute mega fame in South Korea. Never in doubt, really. We're so lucky to have Heung-min Son. He is the face of the club. He's the captain of the club. And like I've said numerous times, sign him up. Make him an ambassador after his career ends. He treats his body so well. He's not a big social person. He He does double training sessions every day with his dad. I think he'll be able to play into kind of 37, 38. Keep him at the club. Finally, I'm sure you've seen this clip, but if you haven't, check it out. And I say finally because this is the final bit of the Spurs news. Jose Mourinho, while he was doing some punditry with TNT for the Champions League final, which of course I'm sure you saw, Real Madrid, well done, beating Borussia Dortmund 2-0, and Jude Bellingham getting a Champions League winners medal at 19. But Mourinho, he said this about Tottenham Hotspur. He wasn't actually even asked about Spurs, but he decided to talk about them when he was asked about Chelsea. He said, Tottenham, they were always fighting to be fourth. Next season in the Europa League, of course they can win it. They look stable, they're investing more. Amazing club, amazing facilities, such a beautiful stadium. You can feel it, by which I know he's talking about you can feel Spurs growing. And actually Mourinho has only ever really been slagging Spurs off since he left, so it was interesting to see him being positive. But he had been asked about Chelsea, and he then said, but with Chelsea, and he said it in a really put down way, I really don't know. He's clearly kind of just doesn't have a clue what's going on at Chelsea. He's a bit embarrassed. I mean, don't forget, it was only about a week ago he suddenly became favourite for the Chelsea manager's job, but that went away very quickly, and they're appointing Maresca today. But good to see Jose Mourinho. I have to say about Jose, when he's not the manager of your club, he's absolute box office. I love him. But when he was manager of Spurs, the defensive football, the negativity, the kind of PR stunts he'd pull, the bullshit, basically, hated it. So he's a much better person for me to like when he's not manager of Spurs. I'm going to take you around now some other Premier League transfer gossip and info. For me, I always like to keep across what the other clubs are doing, and hopefully you enjoy some of these kind of longer, extended episodes where I'm giving you the other Premier League transfer gossip as well. I'm going to start at Chelsea, as I just spoke about them. They're now saying that Chelsea might, and this goes exactly with what I was saying earlier about how they're just trying to throw their money around and sign as many foreign players as they can. They are potentially looking to go to £100 million to buy Alexander Isak from Newcastle. Apparently, for them, his wage demands are not that high, and they believe he's the perfect number 9 for the new project with the new manager. I mean, if I was Alexander Isak, I'd be like, no, thank you. I'll stick at Newcastle, even though Newcastle obviously owned by, a questionable state. They are a more stable club than Chelsea right now. All the talk, I mentioned a few times that Chelsea big in for Osimhen this season, but apparently that deal between Chelsea and Napoli, which was a potential swap deal between Lukaku and Osimhen with money, is now not really happening. And actually, Arsenal are the kind of favourites to get Osimhen this summer. That's quite a scary thought, because Arsenal, I think, really, if they had a really top-level number 9 like Osimhen, they would be very hard to stop. So let's see what happens there. That would be a bit of a scary one. I think Chelsea are going to announce Tosin today from Fulham. They nicked in ahead of Newcastle to get him on a free transfer. Newcastle will be disappointed with that, but Chelsea doing some work early there. Over to Manchester United now. Some big news that Bayern Munich are sniffing very hard around Bruno Fernandes, 29 years old, contracted till 2026. And of course, really the mainstay of Manchester United's very difficult season. He's not the kind of player that I'd want playing for my club because he's such a miserable diver. But there's no doubt of his talent. And Portuguese outlet Ojogo say that the Bundesliga side have contacted his agent and are trying to see if Bruno Fernandes would be interested in following Vincent Kompany to Bayern Munich and maybe even be the man to give the bullets to Harry Kane to get Bayern Munich back to trophy-winning ways. That's an interesting one. I personally do not see Manchester United selling Bruno Fernandes. I don't think they're going to have to need to sell anyone for profit and sustainability rules, and I think the fans would be in uproar if they sold Fernandes. But I guess if he really wanted that move and he wanted to push for it, maybe that's something that could happen. Keep an eye on it. Apparently United also interested in Wolves' Brazilian forward Matheus Cunha, 25 years old. He's had a really great season. And they're also sniffing around Mohamed Kudus at West Ham, who had a great debut season at the London Stadium. United looking to pull some financial muscle into supporting Ineos's growth of the club. They've also, as I've talked about a lot, been interested in Michael Olise from Crystal Palace. But they are now wondering, or not wondering, but they are suspecting that Olise is erring towards going to Chelsea. Again, like I said, Chelsea just looking to buy pretty much anyone. If I was Olise, I would steer so far away from Chelsea. I'd steer away from Man United as well, until they kind of get their ducks in a row and all of the things sorted so that the side are kind of going in the right direction again. Like, you don't even know with United whether Ten Hag's going to be there or not. Speaking of which, Borussia Dortmund, after losing that Champions League final 2-0, they are apparently going to talk to Manchester United in the next couple of days about Jadon Sancho. They want him on another loan. They cannot afford to buy him outright because Manchester United, I think, want to get about 2/3 of what they got in, what they paid for Jadon Sancho. They want to get 2/3 of it back, which is about £56 million. And we do know that the Bundesliga, unless you're Bayern Munich, the Bundesliga does not give them enough money to get Dortmund making big signings like that. United also looking to buy a bit younger. I've talked a lot about Archie Gray at Leeds, really talented right back and midfielder, and United are seriously looking at signing him apparently. £35 million, 50 grand a week would do it, according to these rumours. But there is an issue because Archie Gray obviously has strong not only ties from playing for Leeds, but family ties. Some of his family played for Leeds as well, and therefore that might be a difficult move for them. As I mentioned, Man United, I mentioned this last week, Man United, I felt that money would talk because they were officially, legally not allowed to go into the Europa League because they are owned by the same company, ENIC, who also own Nice. But money talks, and therefore Man United and Manchester City, according to the Times, will be allowed to play in the same competitions as their sister clubs this season. They've found a route around it already. Some interesting rumours coming out of Manchester City. Talked a little bit about how upset Ederson was at the back end of last season, that he doesn't feel like he gets enough kind of support and love from the press, and maybe even from Manchester City themselves on their social media pages for the work he does. He's a top goalkeeper. I think he's one of the 2 or 3 best goalkeepers in the world, but it seemed like he might be interested in moving because Stefan Ortega came in, made some big saves, especially in that Spurs game for that one-on-one with Sonny, and Ederson kind of made some mysterious social media post suggesting that maybe he'd be looking for something else, and therefore this weekend rumours have come out that City are sniffing around Mike Maignan from AC Milan. He's a brilliant goalkeeper and his distribution is unbelievable. Apparently if Ederson does want to leave Man City, he will have to hand in a transfer request to get that started. Crystal Palace. Now this links back to Spurs perhaps being interested in Eze. Daichi Kamada has been given the here we go from Fabrizio Romano for his free transfer from Lazio to Crystal Palace. Now, Kamada played under Oliver Glasner at Eintracht Frankfurt in their Europa League winning team, and he's a really exciting player, especially on a free transfer. And this could be one that opens the door for Eze to get his move, maybe even to Spurs, if the money is right for Crystal Palace. So that's one to keep an eye on as well in terms of Kamada coming in. Will that mean the likes of Elise and Eze have to leave? Some Arsenal news now. Bayern Munich, apparently, as well as looking to bid for Bruno Fernandes, also going for Arsenal left-back Alexander Zinchenko. I have to say about Zinchenko, in his first season at Arsenal, when he came in and he was the first to invert as a fullback at Arsenal, I was incredibly impressed with him. Seems to have really dropped off this season, doesn't play that much. So perhaps a reunion with Vincent Kompany at Bayern Munich, because they used to play together at Manchester City, of course. Apparently Arsenal have inquired with Barcelona over the availability of 19-year-old Senegal international defender Mikhail Faye, and also they are looking to enter the race for Feyenoord left-back Quilindishi, I don't know how to say that, Hartman. But he has been injured this season. So the Telegraph are saying Arsenal very interested in Hartman, but they're going to wait till his injury is over. Very interesting bit of kind of backroom, boardroom level gossip coming out of Arsenal, which is that Mikel Arteta's contract, which is rumoured to be £10 million a year, will also include a 2.5% stake in the club. So he'll become a part owner as well as the head coach. Now, I have to say, this reeks to me of when Alan Pardew signed a 10-year deal at Newcastle United, something that your man Mike Ashley, the chairman of Newcastle, came to regret very quickly, because then they had to pay him off when they had to sack him. How it'll be if Mikel Arteta has a bad season and they need to sack him if he's a 2.5% part owner of the club, that could be very, very awkward indeed. A few days ago, Arsenal had to delete an embarrassing social media post where they said that Bukayo Saka was the only player in the history of the Premier League to have scored against every side in the Premier League that he'd played against, every different club. They said he'd done it 25 times and that he was a history breaker, when we all know Harry Kane had done it for Spurs against far more clubs. And a lot of Spurs fans got in there on Arsenal's Twitter account, replying to them, telling them how wrong they were, and Arsenal had to delete it. So I thought that was kind of hilarious. Emmanuel Petit, a club legend at Arsenal, incredible French defensive midfielder. He's come out with some interesting quotes, which I thought I'd bring to you. I know I have a lot of Spurs fans watching. So he said, "This Arsenal team are good losers, but I'd rather they were good winners. Even though Arsenal have had a great season, I'm sorry, but in 10 years' time, no one will remember them." So this comes down to for me, all the abuse that Spurs used to get under Pochettino when, we came second and we came third and we got to the Champions League final and people were calling us putting the pressure on FC. Well, it's good to see Arsenal getting a similar dose of their own medicine because they gave us so much abuse for that. And now even their own club legends like Emmanuel Petit coming out and saying that no one will remember them in 10 years because they couldn't get over the line. Some more transfer news. Newcastle and Liverpool are both keen on signing Bryan Mbeumo from Brentford. He's only 24 years old. I thought Mbeumo was a lot older, and he really runs those channels well. I like Mbeumo, and I can totally see why Newcastle and Liverpool are interested in him, and I wouldn't mind Spurs being interested in him too. How much money do you think it would take to get Bryan Mbeumo out of Brentford? He's had a few really good seasons and picked up the slack when Ivan Toney got his suspension for gambling. Be interesting to see if Mbeumo goes anywhere. I really, really like him. Some managerial news. Brighton apparently leading the race for Steve Cooper to replace De Zerbi as their manager. But apparently 3 other clubs are also interested in Cooper. Now, I said last week, Steve Cooper had rejected the opportunity to replace Vincent Kompany at Burnley, and I wondered whether that was because he might get an offer from a Premier League club. Well, it looks like Brighton are interested in him and a few others too, but the other person in the frame for the Brighton job is their ex-manager Graham Potter, according to The Athletic. So let's see what happens there. I think Potter would be a safer pair of hands, but they've already seen with Potter that if he gets a job offer from a big club, he will go and take it. And I wonder if that'll put them off. Also, the old don't go back thing that stopped Daniel Levy going from Maurizio Pochettino. Will that count against Graham Potter? And will Steve Cooper get that Brighton job? Steve Cooper, highly renowned for the football he played. He did obviously do incredibly well with the England unders as well. So let's see what happens there. A lot has been going on at Everton over the weekend and at the back end of last week. Their deal with 777 Partners, the club who were supposed to be buying them from Moshiri, has completely collapsed. Here's the quote that came out of Everton about it. The agreement between 777 Partners and Blue Heaven Holdings Limited for the sale and purchase of the majority shareholding in the club expired today. The club's board of directors recognise the considerable level of financial support 777 Partners have provided the club over recent months and would like to take this opportunity to thank them for this. Now, 777 Partners have had investment in loads of different clubs, loads of different companies as well. And a lot of these companies have gone into administration and have really suffered. And 777 Partners did not pass the Premier League's fit and proper test for any chairman and any boards and any companies that want to come in and invest in the club. Meanwhile, during that whole period where they were trying to get a sign-off to become the owners of Everton, they were paying hundreds of pounds, I think like 250 million pounds, maybe as much as that, to support. They were giving that as loans to Everton to support them. Now we're in a situation where 777 can't be the owners of Everton. They need that money to be paid back. Everton are in disarray. They're building the new stadium. They can't afford to finish that stadium. And meanwhile, Sean Dyche doing an incredible job to keep them up last season, despite them already having been docked loads of points. So Everton, it just goes from bad to worse. Be really fascinating to see what happens. And like I said, that might well link in with that June the 30th deadline. We're talking about 27 days from now, where they are probably going to have to get players off their books, and other clubs, they will be like vultures. They will be like vultures trying to take those players as cheaply as possible. Arsenal physio Jordan Rees has joined Manchester United. We know that Manchester United have had a lot of injury problems in the last year, and they're trying to deal with that. Ineos are trying to get their backroom staff sorted, and they're nicking the physio from Arsenal. It'll be interesting to see if that makes a difference. Maurizio Sarri, remember him, the chain-smoking ex-Chelsea and Lazio manager, apparently a contender for the Leicester City job to replace Maresca there. As I said last week, Leicester apparently may well be up for a big points deduction themselves for breaking profit and sustainability rules last time they were in the Premier League. So if I was Maurizio Sarri, I would be steering well clear. But would it be interesting to get some more chain smoking going on the benches in the Premier League? It probably would. I think he did a better job at Chelsea than people actually give him credit for. He did pretty decently there, but again, just one of the many managers who has fallen foul or did fall foul of the Abramovich era of being like, if you do not succeed in everything within the first season, you will be sacked. Speaking of managerial appointments, Hansi Flick, as we know, was appointed as the Barcelona manager last week, but in keeping with the way it's been at Barcelona for the last few summers, they cannot afford financially to register him and his staff as official members of the club. Do you remember this happening the last few summers? Barcelona made signings, but actually until they agreed a deal with the Primera Liga for their finances, they weren't allowed to register them, and seemingly that's happened already with Hansi Flick and his staff. What an odd club Barcelona have become. Anyway, guys, that's the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. Do give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Do press subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to become a member or a Patreon member or a Pro member, it's £1 a month. All the details in the description box below. And you can also listen to this as a podcast. Just go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, type in the Spurred On podcast, and you can find me there. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Cheers.